And let's get started. Actually, let me start with a little recap. So, for anyone that wasn't here, Amy Lutkin wrote this memoir. It's called The Lonely Hunter: How the Search for Love is Broken. And she wrote it, she's a 30 something, and she's a columnist. She wrote all about, as the title suggests, the dating app scene, the difficulty of relationships. She critiques the idea of what is relationship and what isn't relationship, which is pretty like fascinating. The idea of like monogamy being the epitome of the relationship, and in a consumer culture that teaches us that we need to constantly improve ourselves. So, thank you for anyone now coming in. Let's get started. So, it starts though the intro. We're on chapter 13 now, but eventually I'm going to post the videos I've been reading on here onto like YouTube or maybe to Twitch if I ever get affiliate status. And we will um, have like a fuller picture of it. But like I said, the intro starts where she's at a dinner party and she's talking to her friends about like how do you know when you're going to be alone forever? And she wrote this article by the same title. And there's a little write up that I have on my Twitch that you can read at your leisure while I get into chapter 13, which is called See You Again Soon. She met someone she's like super into. His name is Adrian. And she moved to LA from New York. So that's where we're picking up. It goes like this. I arrived at Dylan's house nearest the beach to sleep on his lumpy couch. It was the middle of a heat wave, and his brother was staying with him too. The three of us worked at our computers in the morning, gathered in the living room between the oscillating fans. I was blogging, and they were doing whatever inscrutable stuff people who work in tech do. I was there less than a day before I emailed Adrian. It seemed safer than a text. I'd at least know if it had probably been delivered. Hitting send brought back that time I spent the previous winter waiting for his replies, the excruciating way the time started to lengthen between each one as he lost interest. If I'd remembered that painful wait before sending the email, I might not have. Dylan and his wife took me to the beach, and I found her much friendlier than in the past. Dylan's her best friend, by the way. My travel-worn self wasn't very threatening. She gave me a recommendation for a place to get laser hair removal, and we bonded. The Pacific Ocean was colder than I anticipated. I was warned that a friend of a friend had recently stepped on a manta ray in the foam. Dylan had told me in the past that the enormity of the ocean made him feel slightly panicked. The horizon line made my heart expand, looking at how big the world was. There was another land across the sea, and another. Nothing ended, it just turned in on itself again. My expansive view of the possibilities in life narrowed considerably when I thought of Adrian. When would he email me back? My return to an unworthy obsession earned Dylan's contempt. You can find someone better and more reliable, he told me, after I admitted to reaching out. He was wrong. Now that had I not met anyone else I'd felt more than a passing interest in, none of them had been particularly reliable. It made more sense to gamble on the person I really wanted, even if it was a losing bet. About a day after I emailed him, Adrian replied. Sure, he'd meet up. On the day of our plans, he canceled, saying he was sick. There, that's your answer, I told myself, feeling very sad. I'd moved to a sublet and spent most of my afternoons in a coffee shop, obviously. Los Angeles has a reputation for being spread out and isolating, but I couldn't go anywhere without bumping into someone I knew. Other New Yorkers, old friends. I was always seeing them at restaurants and bars. There was so much residential space with just these short little strips of activity that everyone congregated at. Though he didn't live nearby, when the door would open at the coffee shop, I'd think, what if Adrian walked in? Wouldn't that be funny? Meanwhile, I went on more dates with yet another polyamorous fella who took me to a secret bar where we bumped into his ex-girlfriend. With an older dude, he worked at Universal Studios as a Walking Dead zombie. With a woman painter who took me to a very expensive vegan restaurant. With a man who brought a Hitachi wand in a giant bag to the wine bar. Then, very surprisingly, Adrian emailed me again. He was feeling better. How about Friday? My makeup was perfection. I wore a fade black dress covered in tiny flowers and let my freshly washed hair hang loose. As I walked to the nearby pub that he'd chosen, I put in earbuds and hit play on my phone. The Haim song Want You Back came on. It made me grin. Hope unfurled in my heart, no matter how sternly I tried to tell the little sprout that this was only a meetup. It didn't mean anything. At the door, a grizzled old bouncer checked my ID. He told me some joke I don't even remember, and I laughed, turning the corner to see Adrian standing up to greet me. Look at that smile, he said. He was exactly the same, and also completely different than I remembered. He was a little grayer around his temples, I thought. He seemed smaller than before, slightly shorter or skinnier. Those eyes were just as compelling to me, light green pools above the smooth planes of his cheeks. We sat in the dark bar, drinking and making conversation. As usual, it was very easy to talk to him. Feeling like I can talk to someone all night had always entranced me. We talked and laughed about everything except what was clearly on both our minds. I didn't mention that he'd ghosted me and never mentioned it either. A soccer game, or he never mentioned it either. A soccer game was playing on the screen over the bar, drawing our attention for a moment. Soccer players are always so good looking, I said offhandedly. Oh, he said, looking at me suggestively. What? I was a soccer player. I thought you were paying me a compliment, he fished. Well, you're very handsome, I said, biting the hook. It was the first clear moment of flirtation. The bar filled up. We saw a couple who deemed to be an awkward date. It led to a discussion about dating apps, and he mentioned he was on a few. He was single, I thought. We finished our third round. The question hovered if we should go to another bar. We ended up walking to the grocery store, buying beer and canned wine, then walking to my sublet, setting up chairs outside the door. I knew that we were both deliberately getting drunk enough to make some bad choices. The moon was out, lighting the small courtyard fountain bubbling at its center. The shadows of fat palm leaves made the corners cinematic. A French bulldog that belonged to my neighbor appeared from under a bush with an orange plastic bone in its mouth. Look at this good boy, Adrian exclaimed, leaning down to wrestle the animal over the bone. As I played, the talkative energy that had been carrying the evening left me. I grew more still and absorbed watching him croon to the dog, muscles visibly shifting under his black t-shirt. Gradually, he grew quieter too, giving the puppy one last pat. The bulldog took its toy and scampered off, leaving us in tense silence. With no more words in the way, we kissed. We moved from the courtyard to my little room, quickly undressing and doing what we did best together. With more recent affairs for comparison, the actual mechanics of the sex we had weren't quite as unbelievable as I had immortalized them in memory. We had a magnetic attraction and familiarity. It was also a bit awkward and hesitant. He was rougher than I remembered in a way that was more about his needs than my inclination. The brief sense of disappointment was whisked away quickly as the mystical effects of fulfilled cravings took hold. Here was the last thing I'd wanted for months, long past the point it had seemed possible to have it. Gratification was delicious. Plus, now I was here in Los Angeles, only a short car ride away from him instead of an entire country. We could be together. Wasn't the whole problem just the distance and the lack of honest communication about how we felt? Now that he knew I wanted him and would forgive him for disappearing on me, he'd naturally want to date for real this time. Yet when Adrian wrapped his arms around me afterward to continue our endless conversation, I wished I could hit pause to savor the moment much longer. I knew, even in the victory, that this was a momentary high. The voice singing with delight inside me was underscored by a deeper chord of woe. From my recent exploits, I'd learned a bit about personal evolution. I was much more malleable than I'd thought and far less stuck than I'd thought. I managed to make many changes in how I related to other people, to my own body, even to where I'd lived my entire life. I'd also run up against many things that couldn't be forced to change overnight within myself. There were definitely things I couldn't change about Adrian because you really cannot change another person. There was no reason for him to suddenly become the guy I needed him to be, to show up for me, reach out to me, to give more of himself than just sex. I wanted Adrian to want me as much as I wanted him. I wanted him to say he wanted to see me again. As he left, he didn't look over his shoulder at me. He didn't text again either, so I messaged him a few days later and said I'd like to hang out again. As friends only this time. This is a horrid lie, and he responded that not having sex would probably be for the best. We met again and were having sex within about 10 minutes. Afterward, I hugged him from behind as he sat on the edge of the bed. I kissed him up and down his spine, fervently conveying my deepest wishes physically because I couldn't express them with words. Let me sit in your shadow just to know you're near. Take whatever I have inside as long as part of me is with you. Deranged poetry filled me because pragmatic language couldn't cover it. What would I have said? Could I have said, a long time later, I would admit to a friend, sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I just told him I loved him. A veteran of heartbreak as well, that friend would shake their head and simply say, he already knew. That's why I couldn't say it. Adrian did know I loved him, and putting it into words would have only forced him to tell me definitively that he didn't love me back. I couldn't face that. As Adrian got dressed, he suggested we meet up the following week, like Wednesday. I walked him to the door and we kissed one last time through the courtyard gate. Finally, he had been the one to suggest we hang out, and I was thrilled. All week I walked on air. Hours before our scheduled meetup time, he texted to say he was sick and couldn't make it. Bummer, I wrote. Let me know when you're feeling better if you still want to hang out. And then the cruelest response of all, none. Over the next few weeks, a lot happened. I moved again to a longer-term sublet in Silver Lake. I started a new job, one that flew me to Austin for a weekend. From there, I went back to New York, then back to Los Angeles again. It was funny to now skip from destination to destination with purpose after so recently crossing these same lines with none. Actual purpose in traveling makes wandering look ridiculous, no matter how many wild adventures you have along the way. And then I lived one of the most triumphant moments of my life. I sold a book. This book. Something so glorious, I was sure it would be ripped away from me at any second. Suddenly, despite my disappointment and love, my life felt meaningful and directed again. All it took was external validation on a much higher scale than anything that had ever happened before. As I ran around, worrying, celebrating, and exhausting myself, I tried to catch up with family and friends. People were having babies and crises and moving and breaking up and getting new jobs. The lives of everyone I loved had continued ups and downs as I chased a new life across the country. There was plenty for me to share as well that was probably more important than getting ghosted again. Too bad I couldn't stop thinking about what happened with Adrian. The most recent stuff. After nodding attentively at their stories, I told many friends either a long or an abbreviated recount of what had happened, depending on what their openness to this kind of man analysis. I wanted to know why he had disappeared on me yet again, especially when we were finally in the same city, finally so close to living out the relationship make-believe for real. A married friend said, when stuff like this used to happen, I'd tell myself, there's someone else. It was just easier that way. There's someone else, that's it. A single friend going through something similar with a guy who was always sliding into her DMs said, they're just not thinking about it. Women think about it all the time. Men just don't. They're just not thinking about us at all. Billy and I sat in her car by the East River in a brief moment before she had run home to her kids, talking about depression and how sometimes people we know just would go into hibernation. For a brief moment, I had compassion for whatever mental health issue was keeping Adrian from texting me. That had to be it, right? A coworker in Austin asked me how old he was. I told her 36, and she said, I really think my age gets scared. They're just freaking about their life and where they're at. My mother helpfully suggested it was because I'd gained some weight back in the last year, unable to control herself. That seemed plausible for an awful minute until I remembered he'd fucked me twice, 2 weeks apart. He knew what he was getting the second time, at least. My therapist in New York mostly listened as I told her via FaceTime that I suspected he had just found someone younger and hotter who was actually willing to change for. Somebody he'd text back. Well, the patriarchal standard of beauty is something many men chase, she said, confirming my worst thoughts in so many words. But I think it's a common misconception that someone changes for another person or becomes better because their partner deserves it. Actually, their crap just fits in with that other person's crap. Dylan said, maybe he just thought you were good for sex but too boring to date. We paused and then laughed. Suddenly, I suspected this was the correct take. I appreciate the idea that I was too boring but funny to Dylan. Look, he's keeping you hanging and he'll pop back in when he just wants to have sex again, Dylan continued. And I recognize the annoying tone I used with my girlfriends when they wasted their time on total losers. Because that's what you taught him he could do. Just let it go. Let him keep living in his sister's garage in the valley or whatever and find someone else. And to almost all of these suggestions, I responded, I know. I knew also that I was being very repetitive and dull as women try to unravel the mystery of a shitty guy usually are. It was time to let it go. It had been time to let it go. When I sold my book, I bought myself a tiny bottle of Prosecco, drank it, and sobbed on the couch. Nothing else mattered, and I had to be thankful that I'd met Adrian because in pursuing love and thinking and writing about love and loneliness, I'd come up with something to say that someone was now going to pay me to share. But he was a writer who was trying to sell a book. I stopped asking why Adrian didn't want me and asked a few people, should I tell him? I mean, come on. If there was ever a way to get back at someone for being kind of a dick to me, this was it. I had something he wanted, even if it wasn't me. It was me adjacent, a level of success he aspired to, and the success of a woman often seems particularly stinging to men in their field. It was a petty idea, and it had appeal. Petty ideas often do. I saw a man I used to work for at a bar. He was a little stoned and I was a little drunk, so I asked his opinion. Well, here's the thing, he said, gesticulating broadly to emphasize his point. Dude is keeping you on a tether, right? And sure, you can tell him about your book and be like, that's right, you bologna sandwich bitch, but then he probably will really never want to see you again. Ultimately, that isn't what stopped me from texting him the news. I considered it a few nights in a row, telling myself that if I wanted to in the morning, I could. Each morning I woke up at peace with Adrian and the universe. Who knew what was going on with him? There was no need to kick the hornet's nest of feelings again, or sully my accomplishment with a half-baked attempt at revenge. That was what I thought I believed anyway. 2 months after arriving in LA, having finally settled back in after that second round of traveling, I grabbed my computer and walked down through the hills of Silver Lake to the neighborhood coffee shop, planning to catch up on work. The sidewalk was so steep I had to take baby steps, careful of my balance. Humming zipped around the trees, and I grinned at them, feeling like I was observing something secret. That's how someone felt about pigeons once, I thought, and that made me like them even more. I was wearing a soft cotton dress and a pullover. It was a little too warm, but the sun kept seeping through my layers, felt nice. Every single day felt like most beautiful day of it felt like the most beautiful day of the year in Los Angeles. I hummed and composed in my head the words I typed out soon. I turned the corner into the coffee shop entrance, and there he was. I recognized Adrian's back, his shirt, his bag, the second they came into view, my mind hungrily jumping on the subject of its most intense scrutiny in the last month. He was waiting in line to order. I walked up directly behind him and tapped him on the shoulder. It's very rare to witness the look in a man's eyes as he realized he's about to have to deal with a woman he thought he'd never have to deal with. Shock, disbelief, dawning terror, and then an attempt to mask it all with a warped smile. I just would happen, I said. I laughed a giant Ursula the Sea Witch laugh. He recovered slightly, asking how I was, and leaned in for a hug. I wasn't composed enough to reject it. I held my body away from him and patted him in an aggressively platonic gesture. His familiar smell that had lingered for days in my sheets wound around me for a brief moment, and my amusement fell away. What's going on? He asked once more in a high-pitched voice. How are you? At that, I smiled again, dropping all my good intentions and high-minded ideas about how gloating is bad. Great, I just sold a book. What? He said, like he didn't understand. I just sold a book, I repeated clearly and watched him absorb what I was saying. That's right, you bologna sandwich bitch. He seemed confused, though I told him before that I was trying to sell one. He asked the publisher, and I told him he looked even more confused. He asked me if I meant a subsidiary of that publisher. No, I said. Then he asked what I was doing at the coffee shop, and I said I'd planned to work. So had he. On the edge of hysteria, I sarcastically suggested we sit and work together. He took me at my word and agreed. I ordered an Americano. The barista, hugely misreading the situation, asked him if we were paying together, and he held his breath. For a second, I considered making Adrian pay for me. In an unuttered act of mercy, I stepped in and paid for myself. He watched as I signed for it. My voice was calm and I felt remarkably clear-headed, but it took everything to keep my hands steady, to keep the cup from clattering in its plate. When we walked to the courtyard, I did have a moment of panic. We don't actually have to sit together, I began. No, we should talk, he said. We found a bench secluded from the rest of diligent writers, clacking away on their keyboards, and sipped. My heart was pumping so hard. I could feel the heat gathering under my clothes, sweat pooling at my temples. We talked about the book some more. He still seemed disbelieving. It's hard to piece together how we segued, but eventually I said it. You could have messaged me anything. I told him that you didn't want to date, that you didn't feel you could see me, that you just wanted to be friends. You just left me hanging. I was going to reach out, he protested. No, you weren't, I said. I was. We were quiet for a moment. I didn't end sleep with you that second time, he said eventually. I just have no self control, and the truth is, I'm kind of a coward. Sometimes I think people confess to shitty things about themselves and think that's the pinnacle of good behavior. That's the cue for people they did the thing to rush in and support them through the pain of being bad. Yeah, you are a coward, I said, looking him right in the face. It was a face I loved to look at, and I wish I could say that had no effect on me at that moment, but it did. And I'm brave, and I'm honest. And I would have dealt respectfully with you, but you treated me like trash when you completely didn't have to. My shoulders were tight, my eyelids aching. It should have felt like a relief to finally say all that. Instead, it felt very similar to when I said I'd be alone forever at that dinner party. It was the esophagus clenching tension of knowing you have articulated something that has disrupted the norms of what you're supposed to say. This wasn't a speech I could smooth over or take back. I concentrated on not crying and waited for a response. After a pause, he said, I know. Though I didn't remember if he ever said he was sorry. That would have been the moment. I do not think he said the words. Instead, Adrian told me he'd been seeing someone and had very recently and very abruptly gotten serious. Indeed, it was so serious they'd just booked tickets for a trip to Mexico, and she wasn't the sort to ask him to be monogamous, but he wanted to try. The situation was always so strange with you and me, he added. Maybe if it had been different, things would have worked out differently. Well, you can say that about anything. Yeah. I could totally picture her, the girl. I saw her as a 27-year-old with colored hair and tattoos and into punk music. Thinner than me and probably shorter than him with very perky breasts and no bra and lots of style. Someone I imagined was simply better than me instead of better for him. Only later did I wonder if Adrian told me some of the real details of the relationship at his own petty revenge for me having some success as a writer. The part about how he wanted so much to be faithful to her, the part about how he actually booked a plane ticket when she asked him to. I almost hoped that wasn't the case, rather than him just hurting me with that carelessness. I shrugged. What could I say? Well, if you found someone you can love, I'm happy for you, I said. I'm sure that sounded like a lie, but it really did seem better somehow for him to love someone else than to just not love me. Love? He said. I don't know about love. That old line. He got quiet again, and my thoughts did cartwheels, not sure where to land. I was thinking about her and the trip just then, he said suddenly. I didn't want you to project onto my pensiveness. I had no idea what that was supposed to mean, except that even when I was sitting directly in front of him, he wasn't thinking about me. I gulped down the rest of my coffee. Well, this has been about as much of a jolt as I needed today, I said. I'm gonna go home and work. I live up in the hills there now. I pointed, not wanting him to think I was covering miles to get away. He asked me what street with an intensity that suggested his girlfriend probably lived nearby too. Great, I thought. I'll probably see them walking a puppy soon. I put down my cup and saucer. I'll let you bust that for me, I said, leaving it and probably a butt sweat stain behind on the bench. I walked away without looking back. I got about a block and a half before my phone buzzed. Now he was texting me. His message said it had been great to see me and to let him know if I'd like to have a coffee sometime. And congrats! I responded that it had been good closure and then non-committally about the coffee. It struck me as insanely tone deaf to ask would I do the work of reaching out to him yet again. He most likely just wanted another shot at being a good guy, but how many chances do you get? Then I deleted his number. I deleted the photos of him petting my cat on the couch and kissing my cheek in a restaurant, and yes, of his dick. It was a largely symbolic gesture. Sometimes we do need symbolism. That night, a huge storm rolled across the city. Thunder crashed, and lightning lit up the dripping lime trees outside my window. I pictured him somewhere holding her as he'd held me not too long ago. My stomach cramped, the thought making me physically ill. So I tried to picture myself as I'd like to be one day. I kept returning to that moment when I strode down the street listening to that corny Haim song, looking and feeling my best. Determined, powerful, not knowing what would come, and with the courage to try anyway. What a darling, bold idiot she was, and so different from the frightened woman texting her first date in years from a nail salon bathroom. It still hurt, even knowing that everyone had been completely and totally right. It hurt so much. Having been in love before, I knew I would recover. Someday I'd feel nothing at all about Adrian, not even mad, but I would feel again. I would be brave again. I promised myself, alone and shaking under the covers. That's chapter 15 and the end of part 2. All right. Ugh. So, let me be a human for a second. Should probably drink some water. Everyone, any the couple people watching, drink water. This is your reminder. This person is hungry, and I guess oh, it's Pando. So for those of you who don't know, I got a little I got a little pet over on Twitch that I got. It's funny because I think I should probably like change the name. I don't know how to do that in the chat. I'm learning how to use Twitch, and I just learned anything that I know in the last literally 48 hours. So it's funny because clearly in the chat it says Pando, but I changed the name to Twinkle, which is my cat's name. So it's not supposed to say Pando. Gotta figure out how to change that shit. But with that, check out the new Twitch. I'm reading here, but also over there. And there's a cooler look to it over on the Twitch, as it says. But really, I learned how to use OS and shit. So there's some pretty cool overlay happening over there. Um, I'm gonna run to the restroom real quick, and then I'm gonna be back. And I think I'll probably read one or two more chapters, depending on how much I like chapter 14. Chapter 14 is called Single and Fabulous. So I'll be back. We'll put this. I have one of these. There we go. Um, hey, let me see if me taking these headphones off fucked up my sound. Because I'm sure it did. All right, let's see. Hello. Okay, I think I didn't actually. I won't know until the stream ends. We'll see. TikTok sound is fine. TikTok sound stays the same. All right, so oh, thank you. Yeah, I don't know about that. I don't believe in any patriarchal god, but you have a good day also. All right, so we're continuing on with chapter 14, which, like I said, is called Single and Fabulous. For the couple people that are in here, I just started a Twitch, so there's a better view over there. I learned how to do the stuff in the last couple days because I jump into special interest rabbit holes as autists do, and this was the one for streaming. So here we are. So let's get started. So it goes like this. It would be great to be able to say that was the end of my obsession. Embarrassingly, it was only the beginning of the recovery from my obsession. Our last meeting had some narrative clarity to it, despite what Dylan and I discussed about the way life just continues without wrapping up loose ends. If this were a romantic comedy, there'd probably be a scene of me walking away from that coffee shop, settling in at a new one with a confident, wise smile on my face, and then glancing up and making eye contact with some cutie at the corner, implying this heroine would soon be in the right relationship after all. Because she finally earned it by having respect for herself or something. As I am as far from being a heroine as possible without becoming a villain, I actually spent the next few weeks mostly in bed watching TV. Hours of body heat turned my mattress into a nuclear reactor, and my most active choice was one to flip my pillow to find some trace of coolness beneath. I kept rolling back into the groove I'd been wearing in the center of my bed, binge watching Sex in the City. The laptop was overheated as well, whirring gently to keep itself from exploding in my face. Is this how I want to go? I mused before reaching out to start the next episode. After that chance meetup with Adrian, I'd balanced on the knife's edge between two choices. I could pick myself up, dust myself off, and strike out in yet another new direction, or I could retreat and fall into despair. It was a very similar situation, in a way, to that first man I'd gone on a date with, so long ago I couldn't even remember his name. The guy who had pushed me to make my resolution to go on date after date after date until I figured dating out. It was very similar to the first time Adrian had ghosted me, and I decided to keep right on trucking, dating, living, laughing, and leaving New York. The recurring theme of disappointment followed by renewal wasn't lost on me. Most people repeat patterns in their life, and personal growth after a difficult time isn't a bad pattern to repeat. This time, giving I don't know why I can't pronounce the words right now. Giving up beckoned with more power. It was perhaps the awful confirmation that the best self I'd been working so hard on had been rejected for someone else that made the thought of getting up and trying again absolutely ludicrous. Especially since I'd gone through this, like 3 times with the same man. What was the fucking point? After finding out about Adrian's girlfriend, I was quickly returning to my celibate past self status quo of TV and sedation, now with a new hint of anger and unease I hadn't carried before. I'd started all this personal development in January of 2017. In a few months, there'd be another new year, 2019, and that would almost make years of dating. By now, I knew what was on the other side of trying, more of the same. I was disappointed in the story I told myself about what I deserved for being good, working hard, and trying to become worthy of love. I was heated about not getting it. That anger swirled around me like Pigpen's dust cloud. To deal with it, I bought some weed gummies, shut my bedroom door, wrapped myself up in a duvet, and binge watched Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. That's too relatable. Fuck doing anything remotely constructive. After that, I started rewatching Gilmore Girls, discovering it was much more homophobic than I remembered. That's true. Now I was on SATC. I don't know what that is actually. Oh wait, no, that's I don't know what that is. I had a lot of hours to kill before the end of my life. A few episodes in, I realized I was. Oh wait, Sex in the City. Okay, yeah. A few episodes in, I realized I was now closer to the age of Carrie Bradshaw in the series later sessions than its first. I had originally watched the show when I was in high school, and now here I was, one of many single women who had slid gracelessly past the first bloom of youth into their mid-30s without settling down, just like the show's heroines. It wasn't lost on me that much of what was once considered revelatory or shocking about how the foursome handled dating was now pretty mundane. People were horrible to each other then, and they were horrible to each other now, 20 years later. The biggest change I observed between Carrie's time and my own was that ass eating is now fairly mainstream. Actually, most of the dynamics, disappointments, stigmas, and friction between single and partnered people on Sex and the City were super familiar, especially the stigmas. Throughout the show, every character is subjected to humiliations related to being single. They're excluded from work, dinners centered around couples. They're mistrusted, thanks for the follow, by other women with partners. They have to pay for every bachelorette and baby shower in the Tristane area with no reciprocation. And then they sit through the dull torture of watching diapers get unwrapped for hours. The episode where Carrie Bradshaw gets dragged on the cover of New York Magazine by an unflattering picture and the words single and fabulous made me laugh. If my soul at the moment had been put in front of a camera, it would look as washed out as Carrie under the strobe light. And only Samantha ever escapes using relationships as validation for her existence. And that doesn't even make it into the plotline until the first movie. I was so steamed. One afternoon, the computer screen started to look hazy and distant, or perhaps too close. I ran my hand along the gray fleece blanket, pushing the fibers this way and that. Or maybe it was the fleece petting my hand. That's when I remembered that I'd eaten those weed gummies. When I could focus on the clock, I saw it was much later in the day than I'd thought. I was in no condition to leave the house, but the place I was subletting had a long wood patio built out over the roof of the apartment below. My roommates were two men in their late 20s who kept the space in about the condition of an off-campus frat house, except that we were both very quiet, even courteously wearing headphones as they played Red Dead Redemption on the couch. They were happy to say hello whenever I floated by like a wraith. Otherwise, they were not interested in my antics. Yes, I was back to living with people again. Looking for a new room on housing lists, I noticed how many people specified they wanted someone in their 20s or even early 30s tops. I'd wondered how long I would be able to live with other people before I became the living embodiment of the Steve Buscemi "How do you do, fellow kids" meme. Someone my age was supposed to be rich or living in a one-bedroom apartment with their partner. The amount of times I've had that thought. I padded out onto the gritty carpet, and one of my roommates was sitting there making his horse gallop down a digital lane on the widescreen TV. He nodded at me as I struggled to open the sliding door before realizing I was pushing the wrong direction. The feeling of being high on THC had never been something I enjoyed, a fact I forgot every 6 months. It was so easy to access the drug in California, and there were so many ways to ingest it, so many variations on the same product, and lots of appealing packaging. Surely, among all these choices, was one that didn't make me feel like I was having an allergic reaction to my own tongue. Not this time. I stepped out into fresh air finally, and wondered again if this was what everyone feels like when they're high, and if so, why did they like it? Though the apartment was totally mediocre, the vista from the balcony was not. Set up mediocre, the vista. Oh, I just read that exact same sentence. Set up slightly in the hills, the complexes and bungalows of the east side swirled on twisted streets below like streams in the valley. Far in the distance, the Hollywood sign was visible, and in the foreground, tall sycamores provided perches for giant birds. In the 2 months I'd lived in this apartment, I'd spent enough time out there for some of the birds to be recognizable, like a large crow on its favorite branch and a magenta streaked Anna's hummingbird doing aerial maneuvers overhead from one telephone wire to the next. The panorama was beautiful for the layers it offered, creating the universe with so many universes inside it. You could look out or in and be encompassed. It was close to sunset. The light was mellow and gathering clouds along the mountain ridges were turning from gray to pale gold. Looking at nature was less disorienting than looking at a computer screen. I dragged a sagging lounge chair to face the beaming display and tried to settle my mind. Why is the mind unsettled by rejection? It's destabilizing to think something is possible and then discover it's not. Not only was it not possible for me to be with Adrian in any significant sense, it really never had been, which made me question my own perception of reality, my reasons for being in a completely new city, and my ability to make judgment calls about relationships and future. Even without any hallucinogenic drugs involved, I felt fucking bad. In a piece for Gay magazine, writer Allison Kinsey interviewed the neuroscientist David Sue. Sue and his team were developing ways to measure rejection, building on previous findings that taking a pill of Tylenol helps some people with feelings of rejection, the same way it would alleviate physical pain. They discovered that after a rejection, the body releases opioids that bond with the brain's pain receptors to help regulate the negative emotions, much as it would if you stubbed your toe. At least that's what should happen in a healthy brain. The brains of people with depression release fewer opioids, and many of them retreat after rejection to much worse place than they would be. Wait. The brains of people with depression, I feel like this is an important enough sentence I should reread, release fewer opioids, and many of them retreat after rejection, much worse place than that would be considered healthy. There we go. Sue's aim was to figure out how people can recover from rejection when they're having an unhealthy response. He told Kinney, if someone becomes depressed because they just broke up with their significant other and they go to see a psychiatrist, they're still in that environment of being single or broken up. It's not like a punctuated single event. I just broke up with a boyfriend or girlfriend. Now I'm depressed. Now there's this thing called depression I have to deal with now. They're still interacting with that event beyond their diagnosis. Rejection, like loneliness, like love, isn't just an idea. It's a chemical process inside of us. We respond to and recover from the pain of rejection in much the same way we respond to and recover from physical pain. Since the wound of rejection is invisible, monitoring the healing process of rejection is an invisible project. No one on the outside can necessarily tell you you're still can tell you you're still mentally interacting with the event, being negatively stimulated by it over and over. There are answers people have come up kind of I gotta drink water or something. I feel like my mouth's like That's interesting though. I don't know if you all knew that. I don't think I knew that. I mean, like I knew it because it's like, okay, it's all connected, but I didn't know that about the Tylenol and everything. Okay. Okay. No one on the outside can necessarily tell you you're still mentally interacting with the event, being negatively stimulated by it over and over. There are answers people have come up with for how long this process should officially take. Love has a half-life, like radioactivity, that's a common equation of colloquial advice, actually. People say it takes half the time of the relationship to get over it. Some think you're not fully healed until you've lived as long without your lover as you did with them. Or it's 1 week for every month you were together, or the percentage increases depending on how stunned you were by the rejection. Were they cheating? That's a time increase. Your first love? Forget it. You'll be carrying them to the grave. With Adrian, none of these rules truly applied. We hadn't been together. If I'd measured our relationship by days spent side by side, I should have been over the whole thing in a week. I needed to rewrite the rule to say, half the amount of time you felt hope. He hadn't cheated on me, had he? There was no guarantee of fidelity in our interactions, the opposite. If anything, he'd probably been cheating on the woman he was about to visit Mexico with when he spent those nights with me. I still felt like I'd been betrayed. The usual definitions of cheating and dating didn't apply to us at all, though. I was suffering like they had. Whether or not though I was suffering like they had. Whether or not I had legitimate grievances, I wanted the pain to stop. I wanted to stop interacting with the event or series of events that had brought me to this place. I was still working through my haze. In between TV episodes, I pitched stories and ended up writing a piece about grief. I was thinking about death when I started. Then a therapist named Emily Adams expanded my scope. Adams worked as a marriage and family therapist at the Center for Mindful Psychotherapy in San Francisco. In an email, Adams told me that not everyone experiencing grief has lost someone to death. People grieve over the ends of relationships. They even grieve over the end of an idea, a dream they had for themselves or their lives. She said that people tend to think of healing as a linear process. Most of us know that the 5 stages of grief that are supposed to lead ultimately to acceptance. Apparently, recovery from loss is not like that at all. In my experience, people who are grieving bounce around from one stage to the next, and not always in any particular order, she wrote. It's common that the grief process begins with denial and anger, but these experiences will come up much later in the grief process as well. Sometimes depression and acceptance show up first, and anger is much later to rise. Adam's explanation made me picture a spiral dipping in and out of these feelings, the rings getting whiter so you can spend longer in acceptance. Then as the spiral turns, you feel angry about someone and you haven't thought of in ages. It wasn't a perfect explanation for why it's taking so out of me to get over Adrian, but it did make me understand I was mourning the loss of possibility I had felt in our time together, much more than him as a person. I was mourning being a person in love, a state I hadn't known in so long and was very aware was not guaranteed to come again. One moment I walked in acceptance, the next I stepped into difficult feelings to walk for a stretch, and I did then connect my feelings to grieving much bigger losses. I thought of my high school friend Raymond, who drowned in our late 20s, and sometimes I'd see a picture memorializing him posted by mutual friends and wept like he died yesterday. And I remembered that loss took place around the start of my 6 years alone, marking the beginning of a retreat from the risk of loving someone you can lose. In the midst of my angst, I told my mother about this connection and how it didn't seem worth it to love anything you can't keep. Don't be ridiculous, she explained, or she exclaimed. Do you refuse to love a flower or a sunset? Things aren't important because they never end. It's because they're fragile. A few years later, when coronavirus arrived, finally, I've been waiting 13 chapters for her to bring up coronavirus. Things aren't important. Okay, wait, I'm just sorry. I got caught up and okay, I'm just so happy about it. A few years later, when coronavirus arrived and things shut down, grief hung in the air even as government officials pushed people to move past and get back to work. As I write this, over 600,000 people in the US have died of COVID-19. This book came out in 2022. Okay. Also, I haven't noted. Okay, yeah. Okay. Okay. Along with these deaths leaving gaps in families, there were smaller losses to grieve in every individual. The end of a career, the separation from loved ones in quarantine, the loss of expectations around so many things people had planned and dreamed of, for who knows how long before they were extinguished by a pandemic. One of the most painful parts of all that loss was the rush to move on, when that's not the heart heals at all. We can't be forced to recover from pain and loss. It's supposed to be a slow trudge with lots of backward steps. Researchers have been trying to figure out a way to skip all the pain. Sue isn't the only one working on the ways emotions are traced in the body's pain receptors. Stephanie Kapak, I can never say, okay, Cassiapo? Cassiapo, I think that's it. Stephanie Cassiapo is a scientist and widow of the late scientist John Cassiapo. The two studied loneliness and its effects together. Then John died, leaving Stephanie to continue the work without her husband. She's been developing what could essentially be described as a daily pill for loneliness and is often discussed that way in articles about its development, whether Cassiapo would describe the pill that way or not. Cassiapo works with a neurosteroid called pregnenolone, which has been shown to help with stress-related disorders and hypervigilance as a response to social threats, including chronic loneliness. If we could successfully reduce the alarm system in the minds of lonely individuals, then we could have them reconnect rather than withdraw from others, Cassiopeo told The Guardian in 2019. When I first read about these pills, they sounded very similar to an antidepressant or an anti-anxiety medication, even if the chemistry they're working with is different. A pill can help people break out of their spirals. Taking antidepressants helped me recover from grief after Raymond's death, like a rope thrown me in the water, or like a rope thrown to me in the water. Reading about a medical cure for loneliness disturbed me anyway. That rope wasn't a cure, if there is such a thing as a cure to fluctuating emotional states. I still had to pull myself hand over hand out of the stormy waves of depression. It had to be anchored to something, to friends and family, and there had to be a place for me to climb out and dry off that was safe and stable. I had an income, a home, a therapist. Cassiopeia probably isn't suggesting that her experimental medication would be the only recommended treatment for someone experiencing chronic loneliness. Frighteningly, the way the medical industry works now, it's all too likely that lots of people who really need social services might end up getting a prescription instead. When writing about Sue's research, Kinney talks about how recovering from rejection is seen as a character-building mission in American culture. Mental and physical health is treated like an individual responsibility in a similar way, yet mental health isn't just something wrong with the chemical balance in your brain. It's largely influenced by what's around you. Again, during COVID-19, I hate that she uses that language, but okay. A great deal of emphasis was put on personal responsibility, on social distancing and having things delivered and avoiding contact between households, disregarding that these weren't options for many people. The rate of hospitalization and death from coronavirus was highly disproportionate by race, with Black and Latino communities hit much harder than white ones. The Cleveland Clinic attributed much of this to economic factors like working in front-facing essential jobs, living in more populated areas and multi-generational households, which disallowed isolation if someone got sick, and the lower likelihood of having medical insurance that would offer early treatment and testing. It was part of a long-established pattern of systemic racism in the medical industry, playing out at a much more rapid pace, and not something any individual could manage alone. The devastation of coronavirus was in some ways just a heightened version of what's happening to BIPOC. I don't like this word anyway because I think it's reductive, but I apparently also can't pronounce it. To BIPOC communities all the time. Kinney wrote her piece before COVID-19, but much of what she says applies generally to surviving the structures of Western societies that demand so much and return so little. And this is a block quote. Self-help guides, therapy, schooling, and all of our cultural rules and norms determine whether our reactions to rejection are appropriate or excessive, reasonable or deranged. According to these standards, our ability to cope with rejection depends on maturity, resilience, and the heart of self-improvement. We get over it, we shake it off, we cope, we move on, and nevertheless we persist. What we call resilience comes at a huge material, financial, and psychological cost for those who, through no fault of their own, can rarely or ever prevail against a system stacked against them. That's the end of the quote. I need to take a drink of coffee. A pill might help someone suffering from feelings of chronic loneliness who has a great deal of support. The systems created by white supremacy, ableism, transphobia, xenophobia, and more are what Kinney is referring to. A lonely person at the intersection of these types of discrimination is facing a different battle to heal from rejection and isolation. Even the most chemically stable person would be exhausted and traumatized by them. Precisely. In Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind, Yuval Noah Harari discusses happiness in the context of human evolution, examining whether humanity has become happier or more dejected overall since the dawn of man. Since modern society is fascinated with how to feel and maintain happiness, there are many studies approaching the question from sociological perspectives, from historical ones, and from basic chemical ones. The biochemist's thoughts on happiness from Harari's account is that a healthy brain tries to moderate our feelings. Even if you have a momentary burst of joy, you will eventually even out. The mind doesn't like high highs any more than it likes low lows. To be happy is no more and no less than experiencing pleasant bodily sensations, Harari writes. Since our biochemistry limits the volume and duration of these sensations, the only way to make people experience a high level of happiness over an extended period of time is to manipulate their biochemical system. Harari suggests that the key to happiness is controlling how people feel through their biochemical engineering, not through widespread improvements to their quality of life via social progress. From my reading, he's being a little facetious shortly after he backs off the idea of distributing happiness pills and writes that a more complicated and more accurate notion of happiness is a sense of meaning in life, the feeling that what you do is worthwhile and a connection to those around you. My understanding of what Harari is saying is that the recipe for happiness is feeling like you're a meaningful part of the world and that the social barriers impeding you have been removed. Impeding. I don't know. Impeding. Finding meaning in life is a very ill-defined directive, left to the individual. Happiness is always more available to people who fit easily into the dominant oppressive culture as it is. Kinney's article makes a distinction between recovering from personal versus systemic rejection. By the latter standard, I had no serious problems at all. I'd admit, though, that if I had had a pill to take to never feel wretched about my personal rejections again, I might have swallowed it. Time marched on. I came to the end of my HBO rewatch. I started to do things like enter coffee shops again. The intensity of my feelings faded, even if I occasionally sat straight up in bed, muttering some variation of, "How dare he?" By this point, it was a few weeks until Christmas. I planned to return to New York for the holidays on the early side to catch all the friends soon leaving for their own homes of origin. I'd been in LA for less than 6 months, so they probably didn't miss me too much, but I missed them. I was packing my battered suitcase when the phone choo-chooed softly. It was a text Xavier, one of my friends from the dinner party that inspired my original essay, the one that had set me off on a dating spree and caused me to fall in love, then get heart-stomped. I hadn't heard from him in a minute. "I'm writing because I'm getting married, and I'd love it if you could join us to celebrate," he wrote, naming a date when serendipitously I would be in town. He sent a picture of himself grinning in the park with his bride-to-be, plus an image of the homemade block print invitation to their reception. "She's gorgeous," I enthused, "and stylish. Can't wait to meet her." She's really great, and I'm so very happy, he replied. Direct, impactful words. The last he had talked, Xavier had been dating a woman in an open marriage who had a young child, and he hadn't seemed content. We'd known each other a long time. Sometimes when you know a friend for a long time, you don't check in with them as frequently as you should. It's easy to take the relationship for granted, and I'd let things slide because it felt like any time we wanted, we could pick up where we left off. In a way, that was correct. I arrived on the day of Xavier's wedding at the same house where that dinner had taken place more than 2 years ago, the same place where Rachel and John had been married. There was a lot of familiar faces. Again, it was mostly people whom I hadn't spoken to in a long time. John and Rachel were there wearing their wedding rings. I met Xavier's new wife, Bella, whom he'd married at the courthouse that morning. She was a bit reserved, and I looked at her husband with a reverence that felt almost too intimate to witness. The house was bubbling over with people and food. The tables were piled high and fresh baked bread, sliced cheese and fruit, homemade tamales, rice and beans, 3 kinds of soup, which proved difficult to distribute, roasted vegetables, kale salads, and desserts. The small table soon overflowed with bottles of wine as more well-wishers arrived, the brownstone stairs creaking incessantly under the tread of visitors' feet. I tried to do my part by grabbing a glass of champagne and into one of Xavier's old roommates, Dan, a guy who always brought up his girlfriend in conversations with me by the second or third sentence. Hey, Dan, I said. Nice to see you. What's new? Well, my girlfriend and I are just making plans for the holidays, he said. Okay, I replied, sipping my drink. We traded a few more pleasantries, then I wandered down the hall to join John and Rachel. Dan always does this thing where he immediately mentions his girlfriend to me like he's trying to let me down gently, I said. It seemed like the time to air this very specific complaint. Oh my goodness, yes, exclaimed John. He does this. I've noticed him doing this to other women too. Rachel confirmed she'd also heard him say similar things. I wondered aloud, does he really think he needs to warn everyone off? John shook his head. I think he's reminding himself. This conversation produced some gloomy thoughts about commitment at a party celebrating it. I thought about Adrian, who should have reminded himself he had a girlfriend before sleeping with me again. We're gonna take a drink. To address those feelings, I went looking for more cheese. As I turned away from the buffet table, a woman with glasses and a head of short curls smiled and waved hello, then embraced me. Hi, I said, not really knowing who she was. A man behind her was carrying an older toddler, and they were clearly together. That's when I realized it was Xavier's former love tending his wedding. Not surprising, considering their ability to navigate complicated situations. It was a reminder of how much of this story I didn't know. I found Xavier standing alone for a moment by the staircase. He was smiling gently to himself. A, be- a beatific, I don't know if I've ever seen that word, beatific expression that made me impulsively reach out and hug him. We drew apart, holding each other's forearms. Oh, it's good to see you, I said. I know, I'm so glad you could be here, but it's so hard to talk to people as the host. Quick, what's going on with you? I gave a very short summary of my of life in Los Angeles. He told me a bit about how long he and his wife had been seeing each other and their plans for where they would soon be living. Eventually, I leaned in to ask if I could inquire about something more personal. Xavier told me that he had been seriously dating the married woman for 3 years when she and her husband had decided to move upstate. Something already challenging was compounded by a lengthy commute. It just got to the point where I was feeling so fed up and so bad, he said. One day I just decided today I'm going to be really nice to myself. I went out and bought a new pair of running shoes because I love running. And I took myself out for a nice meal. And I sat in the park. And then I got a text from a friend. The text said that the friend had another friend, a girl named Bella. Bella had seen a picture of Xavier on Tinder that she recognized from a photo series made by their mutual pal. I deleted Tinder off my phone. I'd never looked at it, he said. But Bella had thought he was cute and asked their photographer friend to reach out and see if he'd be interested in getting a cup of coffee. Sure, why not, he told his friend. He met Bella that very same day. Their date lasted 4 hours. It was exactly the kind of story I'd always hated being told as a single person. Just alter your headspace and love will slide right in. The only real difference was that this wasn't some anecdote I was hearing from my mom about her doctor's niece's stepsister's cat sitter. This is a story from my friend. I could see for myself how happy he was. The thing to focus on was probably that Xavier had met his true love. Instead, I kept thinking about him deciding to be nice to himself instead of waiting for somebody else to be nice to him. It was similar to my impulses toward expensive self-care, except Xavier hadn't seen that care as a part of improvement or as a part of a self-improvement campaign. He just wanted to feel good again with no other purpose. His voice when he described making that decision had been so full of relief. I could almost taste the wonder of setting aside a failed love affair and finally moving the fuck on. Almost. It was a formless dream. I wasn't sure anymore how to do it, to feel good with no agenda, to do something with no thought of it being recognized by anyone except you. Not asking for anyone else to choose you and say you're worthy, nothing to satisfy except your own expectations of what makes a worthwhile life. It was suddenly a much more arresting subject than what a relationship with another person would look like. Even if I didn't know how, I was inspired to try to wake up sometime very soon and say, today I'm going to be really nice to myself. All right, that's the end of chapter 14. I think I'm going to read one more. I've been reading 3 chapters. We're just going to keep sticking to it, you know? So I just, full disclosure, like I said, I don't really know how this little Twitch pet works, but it looks like maybe whenever stuff happens on my Twitch, it gets experience. It just seems like it's kind of anything. So if you could to my Twitch, like I said, I created a Twitch a couple days ago. It is new. There's a little summary of this book that we're reading that is visible. I might switch over to another little thing that I put together. Let's see. This maybe we'll do this one because I don't think I actually know how I don't know how the chat works, and the chat doesn't seem to be transferring from my Twitch. So maybe this one is more effective. I think we'll do this one. Although, let me do this. Oh, got in the wrong direction. I guess there's no way I can actually make it. Wait, there's got to be a way. Oh, that's better. There we go. Okay, hold on. There we go. I wish I knew how to work this shit. We'll figure it out in time. All right, so anyway, like I said, follow my new Twitch. I'm doing Twitch stuff now. Slowly but surely. Chapter 15 of Amy Lutkin's book, The Lonely Hunter, is called New Ceremonies. And it goes like this. Actually, I should drink some water first. Because you can't just live off coffee. Regrettably. Okay. Woohoo! Okay. I flew back to Los Angeles on New Year's Day because it was cheap. I arrived late at night, enervated and unable to sleep. Visiting home had made me wonder why I'd bothered to leave. I missed my family, and there was no good reason to be somewhere else except for the hankering to feel different. Being in a new city wasn't that different, mostly because I hadn't been trying that hard to branch out. With Xavier's life lesson in mind, I tried to approach this new year with the intention of being really nice to myself, if I could figure out what that entailed. I took things slow. I walked. I walked so much I developed plantar fasciitis in my heel and started wearing inserts cross-lined in my mind from suffering regular aches and pains to being old. Things aren't going to bounce back the way they used to, bitch, I told my reflection, noticing grays at my temples that I'd never seen before. Being nice to myself wasn't getting off to a good start. I was working hours that were disjointed and solitary. There was no office to go into. There wasn't enough for me to do with my days besides wandering to the coffee shop, the grocery store, a bar, a Pilates class if I was feeling decadent. I didn't know how to drive, and there wasn't anywhere to drive to, really. Ugh, that's just, it's all just, it's just, is it a mirror? And is this my book? Often I would walk all the way to Griffith Park and then up to the observatory, observing other people trudging up the main winding path from the base of Los Feliz Boulevard. They were families or groups of friends, with a smattering of lone runners showing off absolutely unbelievable bodies. I rarely walked at night. I had a rule now about being out by myself past 10 p.m. in LA. In New York, I'd walked alone in all sorts of places during most times of night and felt perfectly safe. New York becomes more itself in the dark. Buildings in Midtown are lit to mimic Gotham City sets. Neon illuminates the facades of busy stores with blinding fluorescence inside, and street lamps hang in reliable rows, like pearls along the hem of a neighborhood. Everything about that was familiar to me. Familiarity feels a lot like safety, and I didn't know LA the same way. Los Angeles fell through the looking glass at night and became an entirely new place. On some roads, I could walk through solid blackness for most of the block as giant palm fronds blocked the faint illumination from scattershot yard lighting. There would be periodic strips of activity filled with lifts and Ubers dropping people off and escorting more away. These isolated blocks were like villages in a medieval forest. You wanted to get to one before sunset. Everyone seemed to be closed into their houses or their cars, zipping from one to the other without any thought of anybody outside. One night I was out breaking my own rules. I'd been on a date. Yes, I was still dating, not having much else to do to fill my evenings, though I wasn't enjoying it much. Dating had become kind of a social crutch. I was lonely in a way that didn't really have to do with romantic love anymore. I missed the sense of place that came from walking streets I'd walked a million times through all the stages of my life. I missed being able to always find something to do and someone to do it with. Meetups in LA felt so scheduled, 45-minute dinners written to the calendar weeks in advance. I was lonely from lack of acquaintanceship, the sensation of walking into a place and having everyone know your name. The Cheers effect, a very specific kind of a connection that can only be developed over time and a little bit by accident. Show up to a place too many times and it will happen. I hadn't been here long enough to show up anywhere many times. All this loneliness was somewhat amplified by the fact that I was spending so much time thinking, reading, and writing about what it meant to feel alone, usually actually sitting all alone at my desk. Often by the end of the day, I wouldn't have spoken aloud to anyone. Even the emptiness of the streets was hard to take as I wandered them. LA's sole pedestrian. Not knowing what to do, I turned to my old standby. Anytime I felt like sitting among a group of people in a public place on a beautiful night having a conversation, I could usually find someone else to do that with on an app. There are always more lonely people trying to find someone to grab their hand and pull them to the other side of the relationship divide. I mostly just wanted someone to talk to. That night, this date had wanted to give me a ride home, and I hadn't wanted to get into their car. Insisting I lived close by, I'd said goodnight, swerving away from a kiss to run off into an impractical direction. The path I took curved through a residential area, a much prettier, less direct route. Up ahead, another street connected with mine, sloping down off an even emptier hill. Walking down it at about the same pace as mine was a coyote. I don't know why I can't say this. A coyote. A coyote. It's like when I'm looking at it, my brain doesn't make sense of it. We caught sight of each other at the same moment and both stopped. The coyote was probably around 20 feet away from me, and it looked very much like a dog, except it wasn't. Not all wild animals convey human-like intelligence. When they do, it's unsettling. The coyote and I were clearly having the same thought, which was, should I risk it? Again, at the same time, we both decided, nah, and each turned back the way we'd come. I had gone a few feet when I changed my mind, thinking that if the coyote was going back where it came from, there was no reason to go out of my way even farther. I turned back and saw it had come to the same conclusion. It paused again, and I kept going, taking a fork in the road while attempting to pass by it as unconcernedly as possible. It wasn't until I was out of sight that I started to run. That was inadvertently wise. A wildlife expert told me later that you're never supposed to run in front of a predator because it will feel the drive to give chase, even if all it wanted to do was eat some trash out of a garbage can. As potential prey, the urge to run is almost as irresistible. When I got far enough away that it felt safe to stop, I'd run farther than I ever did under any circumstances not involving a wild carnivore. I gasped, a stitch straining in my side, shuddering from a burst of adrenaline. I started to laugh as I hadn't laughed in a long time. At the sheer preposterousness of everything that was to consider and look for and protect yourself from. The laughter lifted a numbness I hadn't been aware of. That curtain didn't stay up for long, but it was looser, fluttering to allow me to feel all sorts of things I hadn't been feeling. Not all of them were good. That's why we sometimes get numb, even to joy. I began to wonder if something was seriously wrong with me when a brand new symptom of potential incipient lunacy arrived soon after my coyote encounter. It happened a few times, one afternoon walking through another empty street, once in a yoga class, once sitting in my own bedroom, and once horribly on a date at a pizzeria. It always started the same way. Suddenly, I'd feel like I was losing touch with what was right in front of me, like my body was a puppet I was operating from a great distance. Where from, I couldn't say. Another planet, another point in time. Who was I? Did this date roofie my pizza? After a few moments or eons of intense breathing and focusing on a specific point ahead, I would come back to myself and inhabit my body again. What was scariest about the sensation of being unanchored was the temptation to let go completely. Some part of me was curious about what would happen if I didn't attempt to return to my historical standard of sanity. I would wake up naked in the hills or mentally travel to a distant galaxy. I might never come back, and that would be okay. This disembodiment finally visited me when I was with someone I could explain it to. Dylan and I had bought tickets to a comedy show and even managed to get there in time to grab seats. It was sold out in an auditorium downtown. Dylan the first round, and as I sipped my glass of house red, my head started to balloon off my shoulders. No, 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 I thought. I tried very hard to calm down, to reconnect, reminding myself that I was in a safe place, that nothing would happen. Not really. You might die from fear, I told myself, but then it will be over. It occurred to me that someone I knew was there to call an ambulance if the situation deteriorated, and I turned, very slowly, it felt, towards Dylan. I've been having this feeling lately like I'm losing my grip on reality, I said. To Dylan's credit, he almost convinced me that he wasn't alarmed by this news. Is it happening right now? He asked. Yes, I said, realizing that was being able to tell someone else was helping. I tried to describe the puppeteering feeling and my worry that this was the beginning of some sort of serious mental breakdown. I promise I'll get you to a hospital if you take off your clothes and start running up and down the aisle, he said, after I mentioned the potential naked in the hills outcome. Soon I started to feel better, or at least well enough to sit through the rest of the show with my clothes on. I couldn't depend on having someone there to take me back to lucidity every time this happened, though. I needed to figure out what was going on. My sliding scale therapist in New York had seen me when I last visited. I didn't know how to find the right person in LA. I ended up choosing one who was close enough to my house to walk to, one who did EMDR, or eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. A friend of mine who had gotten assaulted on the street had started doing it after he couldn't escape paranoid thoughts about being attacked in his apartment. The promise of EMDR is that it can rewrite the story of things that happened to you and make you see them in a different light. I'd been caught in a loop so long, and that sounded like something I needed. Also, I sold a story, also I sold a story based around EMDR, so I could write the whole session off. What was kind of too bad was that the therapist actually seemed really good, and I knew I wouldn't be able to afford her on a weekly basis or do the write-off trick a second time. I told her about this feeling I had of being stuck in the past and my patterns and my feelings. Conversely, it seemed like I was losing my grip. The strain of these two things was pulling me apart. Wanting to let go, scared to let go. She let me monologue, which is why therapy is good. What I'm really asking, I concluded finally, is am I going crazy? Like, is that disconnected feeling and the beginning of like complete mental collapse? Oh, she said. No. What a relief. It sounds like what you're describing is disassociation, she continued. It's a response to trauma or stress or feeling unsafe. That seemed a bit much. I wasn't traumatized. I was just someone who moved to Los Angeles from New York. I thought anxiously of that sense of disconnect I had on the road the previous summer, the feelings that had followed me through my life of being separate and apart all the time. Where did my mind take me when it was scared of where it was? Wow, okay, so that's an enormous distinction from what my book will be. Because I cannot even imagine being in your mid 30s and being like, I'm not traumatized. Where does anyone retreat to when they feel excluded, left out of step, and isolated for reasons they can't quite articulate? For me, it was like being very far away from everything that mattered and feeling fuzzy about why those things did matter and why I should get back to them. All of this exploration of loneliness hadn't alleviated it. If anything, it had become more acute, because I could see now how far the distances were between us all. This disassociation, though, was about the distance from me to myself, and that had become a much longer trip to take than I had ever known it could be. Whatever, I thought, brushing that off. All that mattered was that this wasn't the beginning of the end of my mind. One step at a time. The therapist let me hold her weird EMDR kit handles that buzzed in my palms as she talked me through a series of meditations. She asked me to picture someone who seemed wise, someone who seemed loving, someone strong, and to imagine them gathered all around me. This was harder than it sounded. Reading the struggle on my face, she told me I could choose fictional figures, and for some reason, this made me think immediately of Tony the Tiger. I couldn't make Tony the Tiger my caretaker, so I picked some friends: Dylan, Billy, my grandmother. Now imagine yourself someplace safe and beautiful, she said, and I imagined the balcony at my apartment that looked over the glimmering city at sunset. She instructed me to imagine each one of those people I'd thought of joining me there, bringing all of the wisdom, kindness, and support I associated with them. The balcony filled up as I focused on the exercise, trying as hard as I could to squeeze everything out of this therapy session as possible. Whoever else rejected me or dismissed me or mocked me, there were other people out there who knew who I was, who cared what happened to me, who understood my flaws, and decided I was still worth knowing. I let myself remember that, let myself live in that acceptance for the half hour I was led for exercises. Briefly, I was really nice to myself. Most love stories tell you that love is contained in one perfect other who recognizes your perfection. As my therapist murmured to me, I saw more and more people I cared about and who cared about me without demanding anything close to perfection. My hands clung harder to the handles. The crowd in my mind grew, filling me with gentle gratitude. The buzzing in my palms came to a stop, and I blinked my eyes open. It's possible that all I really needed was the reassurance that I wasn't losing my mind, but over the next week, I felt better. Loving only one person had taken so much out of me and offered so little in return. I didn't want to pour that much energy into or dedicate that much mental space to finding another Adrian or another anybody. Nor did I want to withdraw again into my bedroom or into the distance of disassociation. The past year had been about the danger of extremes. I wanted to walk a middle path, one that wasn't hiding from the ups and downs of loneliness, one that wasn't making escaping loneliness via a romantic relationship the primary motivation of my life. Go slow, be nice to yourself, I repeated, trying to allow myself some actual space and time to heal rather than finding ways to avoid or distract. If I'd hit a newsletter about my emotional progress, I would have written to those followers and said, "Hey, everybody who's keeping track, I really tried this time and I did fall in love, and it cost me so much effort and heartache and ultimately wasn't very beneficial." I know some people will tell me to keep on trying and trying and trying, even if it eats up my whole life. Well, I don't want to keep trying because I think that my life is more valuable than the pursuit of someone else to validate it. At least I wanted to believe that was true, even when it was hard to. I wanted to remember that there were more people to reach out to, more things to do than walk to nowhere from nowhere until my feet fell off. What I needed to do was to keep filling my balcony, even if it took a long time, even if it was a project that would never end. I'd rushed from doing nothing to change my life to doing way too much. Those things were mostly what everyone else thought I should do to find love and escape loneliness. The people who suggested them were as influenced as I was by the narrative that couplehood is the ultimate reward in a person's life. We were stuck in a loop together. Judith Williamson writes in the introduction to her book, Consuming Passions: The Dynamics of Popular Culture, about how too often the creativity of the human mind gets forced down the same routes by the stories around us. We're consuming passions all the time, she writes. Passions born out of imbalance, insecurity, the longing for something more, find forms in the objects and relations available. So that energy is fired by what might be, being the fuel for maintaining what already is. What I'm concerned with is the way passions are themselves consumed, contained, and channeled into the various social structures they might otherwise threaten. I'd read that a very long time ago, when I'd been researching romance novels for something I was writing. Romance novels had been one way of channeling my sexual energy in those long years without sex, and I'd felt pretty ambivalent about that. I understood Williamson's point to be that often the things we want or care about are much more curated and controlled than we admit, even if only by the lack of alternatives. Did I want to be in love with another person, or was that the clearest example of satisfaction, safety, and validation that I was familiar with?
What if all the single people out there are able to imagine something completely new for their lives beyond not being single? What if everyone were able to explore new ways of connecting? What current systems would fart if we stopped channeling our energy into them? The stuff I wanted to try to care about instead of probably wouldn't have passed whatever Williamson's criteria were for innovative thinking. I was pretty regular. I only wanted to find things to care about that felt new for me. The common advice lonely people are given isn't completely wrong, even if it is trite, and only addresses a fraction of the problem. Do stuff you enjoy doing, and you might meet people who like doing it too. I started by volunteering, first at a food bank in Silver Lake, filling grocery bags for families lined up around the block, then at the Audubon Society, showing up to help water shrubs that provided perches for feathered families. I worked alongside 20 high school students who were there to fulfill community service requirements. Two girls and I were assigned to arduously cart buckets up a hill to drown a few nondescript shrub brushes over and over. They were from different schools. I drifted, hypnotized by the water pooling and soaking into the parched ground as they made small talk about what had brought them there. How about you? The inquiry was directed at me. Oh, I said, I just like birds. This was clearly a bizarre reason to be at the Audubon Society at 9 a.m. on a Saturday, in their opinion. As an adult, being judged by teens didn't faze me too much. They had no idea what socializing after mandatory schooling would be like. I did remember their reaction and smiled to myself with every new hobby or activity or attempt to build out my life over the next few weeks. It is hard to try something new, especially by yourself. I managed to drag a few people I knew in LA to events or activities, but a lot of stuff I tried on my own. I was putting myself out there. The more you put yourself out there, the weirder you seem. I went to a breathwork class, which is where a group of adults literally lie on the ground and hyperventilate until they scream and cry. That's true. Afterward, we sat in a circle to reflect on the shared delirium, and I mentioned I was new to the city, and if anyone had any other workshops or events, I'd love to go. No one replied, not even the Kundalini yogi in the circle. I was so ripe for joining a cult, no one wanted me. I went to the Rainbow LGBTQ plus night at a roller skating rink and watched crowds of young queer people in their best fashion zoom backward as I clung to the velvet walls. A person with a purple undercut floated up to me watching my struggles. Like this, they said in a German accent, exaggerating, putting their feet one in front of the other with the toes turned out, like a penguin. Okay, thank you, I said, after 10 seconds of trying, returning to the wall like a bisexual limpet. They sped off with a shrug. I resolved to come back for an actual lesson. Progress was painstakingly slow, much slower than I wanted despite my new go slow mantra. Trying to get around the rink without stopping, trying to build up community, trying to find things that fulfill or that fill up our lives that aren't our phones or comparing what we don't have to what other people do. These things require patience and occasional boredom and false starts. The rewards are far slower to arrive and much richer when they do. The first time I did a circuit by myself, feeling confident and free, it was a warm glow of accomplishment that depended only on my own ability. I did not have to wait to hear from anyone else to know I felt good about myself. A small thing that made me feel more powerful than I had in a long time. Then I had some luck getting invited to a writers group for women that was mostly sitting around a living room, eating snacks and gossiping. Sitting on a pink plush couch, I felt included in something, even if the gossip was mostly about people I didn't know. Just hanging out was enough. Damn, I had missed just hanging out. No goal, no time frame, no need to hurry or get the check or get to work. The way conversations built and collapsed and picked up, then churned along on the steam of shared laughter. The quiet moment when the laughter ends and then someone introduces a new topic instead of calling it a night, because the talk is so delicious. A comedy person in LA who I knew from New York texted to ask if I wanted to join an improv practice group. Of course. Anything, I'd do anything, and I loved improv, my usual cult. When I arrived, I was informed that they were practicing for auditions at an improv theater. What the hell, I thought, let's do it. I auditioned and got put on a house team. The number of people I knew and could text or call, get a drink with was growing. That centered me even more. So did being on stage, feeling that electric exchange between an audience and a performer that I hadn't realized I missed so much. And then I got a text from Billy. She was flying into Los Angeles for just a few days. A school that an old colleague worked at was looking for a teacher, and she'd been recommended. They were buying her a ticket and asking her to lead a lesson to see if she'd be the right fit. Can I stay with you? She asked. Of course, I answered, ecstatic. I went shopping for groceries, planning what I'd make for her breakfast and dinner, laundering my sheets so she could sleep in my bed, even mopping the floor. That was a very big deal. She arrived in a rented car and leapt out into my arms. It felt so nice to hug her, to be hugged. It occurred to me that I never hugged anyone like this in LA, like it was okay to just sit in each other's arms without wondering if it had been gone, if it had, without wondering if it had gone on too long. I left her alone in my bedroom to work on her lesson plan. She came out after a bit with a laptop and folder, heat up energy shimmering around her like a halo. I need to go to the library, Billy announced. Oh, okay, I can come. I have to renew those books anyway. I answered, looking at a giant pile of hardcovers I'd been dreading carrying on foot. I'll take them, she said, following my eyeline. Half-heartedly, I objected, but soon Billy was out the door. I started making dinner, salmon and green beans, laying out the former over a bed of thinly sliced lemons in a pan, then sprinkled with dill. The piece of preparing a meal I would share for the first time in ages stole over me. I turned on some music and danced around the kitchen a little before setting to pick the beans. When Billy got back, the food was ready. Your books were overdue. I paid the fine, she said, dumping the pile on the floor, but I renewed them all. I offered to pay her back and she waved it away. Well, how much was it? I asked. I think less than $40. I have to look at my change. They only took cash, so I had to go to an ATM. Why on earth did you do that? I exclaimed. Yeah, even the librarian was like, you're sure going to a lot of trouble, but I told him you were worth it. Billy and I ate and talked, and she explained her plans for the classroom tomorrow. I asked her if she really wanted to move out here, and she said, it's hard to imagine leaving Brooklyn, but we've been talking and talking about it. If I had a job here, it would be a clear sign to do it. And I've also kind of realized that a lot of people who are important to me aren't there anymore. Her extended family all lived in California. Her parents were finding it much more difficult to live on the sixth floor in their rent controlled walk up. If Billy could get a job in LA, she could bring them, reuniting the older members of her family with their kin and rescuing her mom and dad from an unmanageable living situation. There was a lot of potential in the air. Before bed, I convinced Billy to let me give her a facial, using all my little product samples and a face mask to pamper her. She had a naturally loving complexion, which she did very little to take care of and probably didn't need to. This is retinol, I announced carefully, holding a bottle, and she nodded gravely. I tucked her into bed and went to sleep on the pull-out couch. Billy and I had the same internal clock for waking up. She tiptoed out early the next morning to find me already scrolling on my phone to see what the enraging news of the day was, and slid in next to me. When we were kids, we would have sleepovers several times a week. She threw a heavy leg across my hips in a gesture I'd forgotten from then, and asked, "What's for breakfast?" Billy got the job just like I knew she would, though she didn't find out for certain for a few more weeks. After her successful lesson plan for a few dozen rapt fourth graders, she picked me up and we drove to the beach. It was too cold to swim, but Billy kicked her shoes off and walked into the water, still dressed in a gray business casual dress. She held her arms up over her head and tilted her face into the sun. I wish I had insisted she wear sunscreen. Then she leaned down at her feet, spotted something, and leaned closer. Look at this, she said. From the water, she pulled a perfectly formed sand dollar a bit smaller than her palm. It's a sign, I told her, wanting her to find the sign she needed to justify uprooting her life to be closer to mine. I think so. Before long, my best friend would be living in the same city as me, after a brief break on different coasts. Billy had a family, and they'd come with her. A husband, two children, and her folks would all soon be living together in a house in Pasadena. I couldn't fit into that house, and I didn't believe I should try. That was her life. It still made all the difference that she would be there, another point from which I could wind more and more attachments weaving together in a future, very slowly. That was chapter 15. All right. Thanks again for listening. Anyone who's here, the couple people, appreciate you. Like I said, I started a Twitch slowly but surely. I got 3 followers. Go over there, follow it. It's through the link in my bio. This is this is Amy Lutkin's memoir, which is called The Lonely Hunter: How the Search for Love is Broken. So we're like a good way into it by now. Let me see. I forget how many chapters there actually. Okay. There are. I know we're in part three. Oh, there's only two chapters left. So yeah, we're almost done. It's been a good book. Like I never read memoirs, and I've been reading it because somebody that read my dissertation recommended it to me because they said that it was in like the same, you know, genre. It's in the same kind of thing. And I'm turning my dissertation into a book this summer. So I figured I should read it. And the more that I've read it, the more I'm like, oh, I actually don't hate the idea of memoirs. I actually think, I wrote a piece called Requirement Politics, and it incorporates like poetry and narrative and academic insights. And so I think that it would be a good idea if I did actually write my book much like this. But like from since that's what my critical media ecology does anyway, is blurring like all those types of insights, I think it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, good. I know I've been really like impressed with. So they said Kay said I really liked the random amount I just heard. It resonated with myself. Me too. Yeah, it's definitely something that it's been a pleasant surprise. I'm gonna read the little summary of it. It's over on my Twitch though, for anyone that wants to hop over there. Just no pressure, no pressure. I want people to be on my Twitch. Go to Twitch. I'm like, look at how many TikTok followers I have. Nobody follows me on here. Please do it. Okay, so it goes like this. In this crackling, incisive blend of memoir and cultural reporting, one woman's quest to answer the question, when can I say I'll be alone forever? Leads her to explore the unprecedented rise of single adults, our society's pathologizing of loneliness, and the purpose of dating. So that's what my dissertation was basically about. It looked at sexual ecologies in this age, and I was like, hey, people in the US are incredibly lonely. And not only are they lonely in a way that she talks about, and I forget, maybe like chapter 11 or 12, but there's enormous repercussions, like in all facets of ourselves. Like there's big consequences for loneliness, especially when it comes to not like without regular touch. It's called touch hunger. And in long term, it turns into touch starvation, which has, it's just like the wire monkey experiment. It's just updated, and it's in a new form, of course, in the COVID era. I've been bummed though. What I'm really not happy about, actually, and I don't know when she started writing this book, but I'm bummed that she doesn't address COVID more concertedly. She had that one tiny paragraph that addressed it. And so, honestly, I don't know. On one hand, I'm a little bummed about it because it came out in 2022. But also, like, it gives me an opportunity to sort of see what she did with this without addressing it. And then I'll be able to actually address it. And of course, from my own experience and shit like that. So maybe it's for the best. Anyway, let me continue on. So this is the actual like 3 paragraph description of it. She says, or the the back of the book says, one evening, 30-something single writer Amy Lutkin found herself at a dinner party surrounded by couples. When the conversation turned to her love life, Lutkin, who had dated on and mostly off for years, stated simply, I don't really know if I'm ever going to date anyone ever again. Some people are just alone forever. As her friends rushed to assure her that love comes when you least expect it and to recommend new dating apps, Lutkin wondered, why, when there are more unmarried adults than ever before, is there so much pressure to couple up? Why is everyone so uncomfortable around single people? Why does it seem like your real life can't start until you meet the one? And is it possible to be single without being lonely? Over the course of the next year, Lutkin set out to answer these questions and to see whether there was really some trick for escaping loneliness out there. She went on hundreds of dates, read the sociologists, authors, and relationship experts exploring singlehood and loneliness, dove into the wellness industrial complex, tossed it all aside to binge watch Netflix and eat nachos, and probed the capitalist structures that make alternative family arrangements nearly impossible. Chock full of razor sharp observations and poignant moments of vulnerability, The Lonely Hunter is a stirring account of one woman's experience of being alone and a revealing expose of other cultures' deep biases against the uncoupled. Blazingly smart, insightful, and full of heart. This is a book for anyone determined to make, follow, and break their own rules. It's pretty good. Like I said though, what I'm stoked about is I don't know about y'all, the one person on Twitch, the five people on TikTok. Um, I don't know about y'all, but like I'm literally terrible about reading anything popular culture. I'm literally the worst at it. I can never get myself to do it. So it's actually like a remarkable, rare thing that I'm reading this at all. And I feel like I should be because it's giving me that case to be like, wow, actually read this. Like, there's good stuff out there that's actually going to really hit you in a way that's important. And then it can give you an example to work from. Oh, sure. Yeah, that's a great question. So, I love your username, by the way. So, Gay the Pray the wait, wait, Gay the Pray Away on TikTok asked. So I made a TikTok earlier in response to a doctor. Um, and they said, yeah, of course, they said, what did you mean in the TikTok earlier when you were responding to the doctor and mono? So I'm gonna try. I wish I could angle my cameras. So, like I said, the one, no offense, one person on Twitch. There's a cooler look on Twitch. Go to Twitch. I got a new Twitch. But what I meant by that is, we know that COVID attacks the immune system. So if you get COVID even once, you're immunocompromised. Like you're, and there's been actually a couple other TikToks that I've duetted recently that do a really, really good job of explaining this in like a super accessible and like not elitist way, which is obviously refreshing and very necessary. So yeah, that's what I mean. I mean, we know that there's enough research out there that goes to show that COVID attacks our ability to exist just like on a cellular level. And I just shared another study, somewhat related, but maybe a little bit different earlier. I mean, it's all related in the fact that our entire bodies are connected, but it's the fact that it causes like our major organ systems are being like destroyed by this in a way that is being under discussed for the severity that it is. Like the disabling and damaging nature of this virus is something that can't just be brushed off as something that's not consequential. So what I meant by that is that it's goofy that a medical doctor would say, "Wow, after knowing that the entire COVID era has en masse disabled people and compromised their immune systems, why would mono and other, what did she say, strep throat, I think, why would that be happening?" Like like of course because there's countless studies and like different like things out in the popular culture press that go to show that this is damaging us, and so we're more susceptible to other things. So it's like, why would she be surprised? It's ridiculous. And it actually is like, regardless of her intention, like pretty harmful that she would claim that she doesn't know why. Like, are you kidding me? But yeah, does that make more sense? I know the book does a really good job of like making back to our regularly scheduled the Lonely Hunter material. The book does a really good job of like just super personably tying in the otherwise like dense material. Like it shows, and that's what's good about like, for what it's worth, I like have a lot of criticisms for pop psychology, but what it's worth, I think this is a good application of it that makes it like more approachable. What's a portal? Also, I'm not a lady, I'm non-binary. Let me see. Uh-uh. Oh yeah, of course. Oh good. What do you? So, are you saying unmasked as in literally, or as in compromising the immune system? So, I mean, anything that, of course, someone wouldn't be taking to like protect themselves. Like, I mean, it's not like masking is even a guaranteed. Obviously, I don't think anyone that advocates for masking and talking physical masking, not autism masking, of course, just because I know I got a bunch of different content that talks about masking in those two main ways. Um, Of course, in a context where most people aren't masking anymore, it's not going to be as effective, unfortunately, but it's still going to be more effective than not masking at all. I think what's been interesting to me lately is seeing especially people that advocate for each person doing what they can within their capacity, knowing that like every point of social change is just individual actors doing something collectively. Um, for those same people that say you need to do what you can to make good change, in the same breath now saying that well, if I masked, it wouldn't make a difference. Like that's a really contradictory way to like understand our impact as individuals in the world. We impact the entire environment that we're in, just existing always, no matter what we do. So it's like you can't actually say that your impact or that your actions don't have an impact because that's factually incorrect. In fact, you not doing something is just going to show other people that they don't have any reason to either. But if you do something, it's going to probably inspire, even if it does, even if it doesn't, 100% of the time, which is, of course, it will. If you do it, more people are more likely to. That's, again, the beauty of apps like this. It's the beauty of having like one person share insights that like maybe other people are like hesitant to make. If they see one person saying things, much like the mass realizations for like queerness and different neurodiversity elements, like until this happened, until the first couple people stepped up to bat, like people just didn't know. And unfortunately, like as I'm often saying, we only know what we know. So yeah, that's to say that like it's always better to do it if you can. Like if you don't have some sort of medical reason to not be able to, because it's always going to benefit, especially in most vulnerable communities, which we know since COVID is ultimately, and I'm using very concerted language when I say this. COVID is an environmental injustice issue. We know that it's an environmental racism and injustice issue. We know that because every type of metal industrial issue is disproportionately experienced by people who are discriminated against and have been historically targeted on the basis of race and bodily ability and any other type of disenfranchisement. That's well documented. We know it, especially because, think about the rhetoric that downplays the severity of environmental injustices on like a fossil fuel kind of level. The like downplaying of climate change. It's like the exact same ideological strain that denies the reality of COVID. Like, and it's not, again, it's never a coincidence. All this stuff's playing out at the same time in the same landscape, downplaying like the train derailments, downplaying the PFAS in the rainwater. And this is stuff that like I don't know if people like really get like how big of a deal it is. Like it's like it's all in the rise in all of these like discriminatory laws. Like it's all playing out at the same time because it all plays into that eugenics. It's why I'm like a broken record on my TikTok saying these things because I don't know if people are really like and for their own good reasons sometimes, right? Because we can only handle so much and we got to take care of ourselves and it's really hard right now. Like not downplaying that, but we got to understand the reality of what we're dealing with so that we can take care of ourselves, so that we can appropriately move forward, you know? So hopefully that answers that question. But yeah, we got to understand our lives as connected. Unfortunately, like that's why again I'm a broken record about making sure we're shifting from the colonial perspective because the colonial perspective views everything and everyone as isolated actors. And so that's an integral part of the way that the current late stage capitalism runs. Truly. Because think about it. Capitalism just puts it's an economic structure that shifts who gets what amount of profit from ownership and the creation of an underclass and a class hierarchical system uniquely situated wherever. But a colonial orientation, it is the foundation of this form of capitalism, specifically in the Western world, that divorces us from the interconnection of all things. Because if you don't recognize the environmental, like the symbiosis, so like the interplay of the natural world that apparently humans have been socialized into believing we are not a part of, if you take that at face value, because that's what we're taught from birth, most of us, then you're already situated in the world in a way to disrespect that nature. And unfortunately, it's built in everything we have, including most education, which is what's so frightening and also actually so ironic about that medical doctor not knowing that that's why they didn't get it. That's why they don't understand why people's immune systems are being compromised, because they've been socialized and trained into a colonial capitalist form of medicine. That isn't, it's just one choice. It's just one form of understanding medicine. And there's others. There's others that can actually protect us. And they would actually do justice. Oh, nice. Well, welcome in, Jackie. I know so I've only been on TikTok for like since last November, which is wild because it'll be almost, it's coming up on a year, kind of. Yeah, no, I'm always happy to. Like I said, I feel like I've been feeling like a broken record in my content lately, but I don't want to be like, I don't know. I don't know if you all feel this way, but like, when you look at profiles like on TikTok and stuff, or like whatever social media platform, do you ever feel like, I mean, like we know that people are pressured into like a certain niche, but I think what I'm trying to like, what I'm butting against lately is like I've been put into like the broad neurodivergent box. I'm like, I'm like, I like it there. It's a nice box. It's like, okay. But what I'm like, what I'm trying to do by like, especially like opening up this Twitch now, is like recognizing that I should be able to just create content about whatever I want. Like, I want to just be able to create whatever I want whenever I want. And I don't want it to be like themed based off of like a certain account, because I'm a whole human, so I exist in multitudes, as we all do, and the algorithm on TikTok doesn't want you to be that way. And so I'm like trying to find a way to expand beyond that, but it's weird because Twitch also wants you to categorize yourself as this very specific theme, and I'm just not going to do it. And I think that has its benefits and consequences. Like, which is to say that I'm not like, I don't feel like and I don't know if you all feel this way. I'm curious to hear your thoughts actually, which is why I'm explaining this. Like, when you look at my TikTok profile, do you look at it and you say, oh, this is a typical content creator? Oh, they're just creating content. Like, they're planning this. This is what they timed it and then they posted it. Because that's not what I'm doing. I'm just waking up and either I feeling compelled to say something, or I don't, and I just do some goofy shit. I don't think I'm ever going to be, and again, this is the PDA autist profile experience. I can't, but I've seen other PDA profile autists be a more concerted content creator. So this can't be like, I mean, by no means am I saying this is universal, but it's not appealing to me to be like a traditional content creator where I'm planning out, okay, I need to do this, I need to do this. I don't want to do that. But it sucks because it's not beneficial technically to audiences, because I'm not going to put like this is what this video is about. Here is the title. Like, the title goes right here in this blank space, curated for the title. Like, I'm not gonna do that. And it's like, I don't know. It's gonna kick me in the ass, but at the same time, like, well, good, thank you. I hope so, because this is just who I am. But it's weird because it's like, I don't know. It's just such an interesting space to be in. Like, I mean, as I think Amy Lutkin's book talks a little about, like, it is very much because of that productivity culture, because of how did she describe it? She had some really good language that I really like. I mean, other than like the wellness industrial complex and stuff, but just like, it's like, okay, here, like, and let me turn every hobby I have into something I must get paid for. Like, I think that's honestly what it is, because it's not like TikTok, especially with this new creativity beta program. Like, they're not paying anything. Like, just in case anyone's curious, like, they will do everything they possibly can to not pay their creators, which is something I'm going to write more extensively about, especially as someone who does research about algorithmic platforms. I've been paid basically nothing. So I'm doing this out of what I just love. I just love sharing everything and being in this community that you all have created with us, like as the general creators. Like, and I say, you can see, I can never hide anything that I'm feeling because it prints all over my chest and my neck. Like, this is everything, you know. It's like, just like Amy Lutkin's talking about. Like, this truly is, and that's what my book is going to be about. It's the neuroqueer community that has, in a context of loneliness that Lutkin talks about in certain respects. That's the book I'm gonna write. It's like updating relationships and identity based off of my perspective, of course, and critical media ecology, everything connected. The way that, like, communities like this have been downplayed, but how much it truly is, especially for people that are like neuroqueer, changing our sense of ourselves and our relationships, and like what is possible and what it means to be alone, what it means to be in a community. Because this is revolutionizing that. It truly is. Oh, okay. So, oh, I don't think I can pronounce her name, but it's the name that starts with T and then there's a P. It looks like it might be like Russian. Is it Pibek? I'm gonna guess. So, I think I answered this before, but just in case maybe you weren't here, like I said, COVID lowers our immune systems, so we're more susceptible to things that we didn't used to be. We, meaning humans en masse, and humans that are expected to contract this virus over and over and over again, when more and more research shows that it's damaging us. It's damaging our immune system. There's so many variants now that are being spread, all completely unprotected, that like tests aren't as accurate as they used to be. And now that, especially in the US, Biden ended the emergency order, the tests are also for profit and they're more inaccessible. So even if you have a test, there's a really high likelihood, based off of anything I've seen, and especially creators on this app actually, that have done a really impressive job of showing that even if you get a test, like especially one of the home tests, it may tell you that you're negative for COVID when you're positive, based off of other tests that are more effective. I forget what, I think it was called Lucera. The Liv told me about that, who posts a lot of really great content. Yeah. Yeah, I got some playlists. So my playlists right now are leftists, which I don't have very much of, and then I got autism, AWWW-tism, and then I got critical media ecology and the sexually violent ecology, or the sexually violent US, something like that. Those are like the broad categories that my research falls into. But really, it's all critical media ecology, if you ask me. Oh, okay, for sure. Oh, nice. I love that you're also PDA. PDA folks, we get some hate. People are constantly trying to like delegitimize, but like when you see the criteria and you see creators' content, like there's just no question. Like, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I know. Yeah, I mean, honestly, it seems like I mean, it's quite obvious. Like, so a lot of my masters, so my master's in communication, and I studied specifically the neoliberal transnational and global media structure. So, okay, and that's like a fancy way of saying the media structure in like a larger fashion has been bought up by a bunch of billionaires in the last 60 years. So that is to say that like that contextualizes the reason why ABC, if anyone's seen, just released a video the other, like a couple days ago, saying and quoting an expert, which is a doctor. I forget what their background is. I think they might be like an immunologist from probably like an Ivy League, was saying that it's totally a feasible future to have 100,000 to 250,000 vulnerable lives be lost every year moving forward. That is literally like, it doesn't get any more clear that that's a eugenics rhetoric. Like that is literally it. Like what's weird is this system, which of course the media is just a microphone of the institutions, like the dominant institutions, like the U.S. government. um, it's really troubling to think that using the exact same type of philosophy as literal Yahtzees. Like, because that is the rhetoric that they used. So, yeah, they're going to claim that it can be forgotten. But I don't know what you're asking. Yeah. Wait, what's TYT? Oh, you better be that chicken. Connor said that their wife and them found a chicken on the road that's too friendly. What do we do? You better be nice to that chicken. Okay, so anyone, we got 9 people in here. I just started a Twitch, so I'm also on there. We were reading Amy Lutkin's memoir called "The Lonely Hunter: How the Search for Love is Broken." Got that right up on there. I have 3 followers. I just started a couple days ago. Please follow my Twitch. I didn't have Twitch until somebody on TikTok was like, "Follow my Twitch. There's a better view." I learned how to do Twitch stuff for this, so please follow it. That's true. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, that's what's goofy. It's like, um, is it Maris or I like that name. Is it Maris or Maris? I guess it'll be hard to clarify in text probably. No, that's so true though. And it's that's why I was really impressed with that video I saw the other day from another creator that has like about the same like size following as mine. Um, I wish I remembered. I'm like the worst at remembering people's names, but they're super nice. And they were like, I'm vulnerable, people. I do edit it. Just take a peek at my profile, and you'll see what I'm talking about. But yeah, people don't know, and I mean, it's you laugh because it's so depressing, but truly, like, it's what's happening is a travesty. Like, we really can't undermine like just how devastating it truly is to be in a landscape and in a country that's going to let so many vulnerable people just be eliminated like that. Like, that's not okay. It's not. It's unacceptable. Yeah, Yahtzees definitely did copy anti-black racism. That's for sure. And also plenty of other like just xenophobia writ large. Oh, okay. Heard of them, but like I don't remember. I'm like the worst. Like I said, I mean, when I said before that like I don't follow like popular media, I also mean like I never like seek out news either, which is like probably I think after I learned everything about the news media, it's hard for me to like trust anything anymore, which is like eventually you have to, but what can you do? Oh, Damaris, okay. I'm assuming is that right then? Damaris? That's pretty. Yeah. Oh, okay. Thank you, you too. And I'm probably gonna get off here. Maybe I'll like try to figure out. So I'm trying to figure out why my Steam isn't launching any of my games. So I'm gonna probably try to figure that out. I've like uninstalled it or what I thought was an uninstall like a million times and it hasn't. So I don't know what's going on, but I'm gonna keep trying. If anything, maybe I'll play some League of Legends or something because that's like the one game I can get to launch on my computer. But drink some water, get some sun if you can. Take care of yourselves. Everyone, like I said, follow my Twitch. Not bad. I've got about a follower a day ratio happening. I That's good. I would like some more. I will look over here. This is the TikTok. This is the Twitch. Maybe I'll put like a camera right here. I'll figure out a way to do that so I'm not like um but anyway, take care of yourselves. I'll see you all around. Thanks for stopping by.